Live.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for joining. We will start momentarily. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this special briefing by ITME Inside the Middle East Institute. My name is Avi Melamed. I'm a co-founder of ITME Institute. Thank you for joining us. As you may know, today we were supposed to have a guest speaker, Mr. Abdulaziz Al-Khamis. Unfortunately, for due personal circumstances, Mr. Al-Khamis could not join us this afternoon. Hopefully, we will have the pleasure of hosting him in the upcoming sessions of the briefing room by ITME. As you can understand, this is the major topic of this briefing room, of course, dealing with the whole US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding, MOU. In this briefing today, I would like to try shortly to explore some regional perspectives regarding the MOU and trying to assess what are the things that we should, at least at this point, we're following, and I'm trying to understand what could be potentially the ramifications down the road. My presentation today is going to be about 40 minutes, followed by Q&As always. Please post your Q&A at the Q&A post box, and our team members will conduct the process of the questioning and answers. Thank you so much for your attention. Well, in front of us is the session's agenda. We'll start with some general framing, understanding Iran's hegemonic project from different perspectives. Then we'll talk about what we call the October 7 domino effect, and then we'll move to talk a little bit about the war and try to understand the question whether Iran's hegemonic project is re-energized following the signing of the MOU with the United States. We'll move on to try to explore what do we have to watch closely, at least at this point, and try to conclude with some perspectives from the region regarding the MOU and maybe potentially the path ahead. Starting with some general framing, talking about the Iranian regime hegemonic vision. The Iranian regime that came to power, the Mullah regime in Iran in 1979, basically has been enhancing and advancing a very aggressive expansion policy under the title of exporting the Islamic revolutions. I've been talking many times about this work plan or blueprint of this regime. At the center of this whole hegemonic vision stands a triangle of deterrence that the Mullah regime has been very effectively developing and using. This is a triangle of a deterrence structure that the Mullah regime has created that basically have been serving the Mullah regime very effectively in its mission. As you could see, it has three major components: the nuclear program, the missiles and drones, project and the proxy, the militias, supported and backed by the Iranian regime. The interesting thing about this triangle of what I call deterrence is that each and every one of those elements is actually acting as a mutual guarantor to the other two aspects of this triangle. So the missiles and the drones are supposed to be some sort of like a deterrence element to protect both the nuclear program as well as the proxies. The proxies are supposed to do the similar thing in the context of the missiles, drones project, as well as the nuclear program. And of course, the nuclear program is supposed to be the ultimate guarantor in context of both two others members or two others elements of this triangle, as well as the whole Iranian regime expansion, hegemonic vision across the region. A significant component in that concept is the ideological one. The Mullah regime basically has positioned itself as the spearhead of an ideological camp that has been known in the Middle East by the name of the camp of the resistance and defiance, محور المقاومة والممانعة in Arabic. This is an ideology that centers around a couple of core ideals, vowing non-compromising animosity to the West. It views the West as a declining, decaying, corrupted, weak civilization. It views the West at the same time as a source of a threat to Islam and to the core elements of Islam, both religiously, culturally, spiritually, and so on and so on. It vows to eliminate and fight the Western civilization wherever it can. That explains the fact that the Mullah regime has been carrying out this slogan of death to America, the big Satan that represents this Western decaying civilization according to the outlook of the Mullah regime. It is also vowing for an uncompromising, non-compromising, and unrelenting struggle against Israel, as it views Israel as a product, quote unquote, of the Western civilization of colonialistic and imperialistic ideologies. It views Israel as an artificial entity that has been embedded and installed inside the heart of the Middle East. Israel, according to that ideology, is not indigenous to the region. It has to be wiped off the face of the earth. And all of that basically has to be done under the banner of liberating Palestine, a very powerful slogan that became enormously impactful in the regional, emotional and political and cultural discussion. All those components together are major components of the story of the resistance, and the Mullah regime very effectively, using that umbrella, basically has been very effectively enhancing its expansion vision across the region, creating what has become to be known as the axis of resistance, a powerful network of both Shiites as well as Sunnis, semi-state actors across the region who are looking at militias that are in many cases also operating parallel to that as political parties in their own homelands, like the Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi Shiite militias in Iraq, Houthis in Yemen, Hamas and Islamic Jihad that are not Shiites, but they are Sunnis, just the same. They are all part of this axis of resistance that basically is the spearhead of this expansion Iranian regime policy. And that axis has been very effectively assisting and serving the Mullah's regime vision as it has been acting in Arab states, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, until the end of the Assad regime, at least by the end of 2024, in Gaza Strip and the West Bank, in Yemen, basically serving very effectively the Mullah's regime blueprint of expansion across the region. As part of its ideology and modus operandi as the blueprint, sort of speaking, to put it this way, to eliminate the state of Israel, the Mullah regime and the axis of resistance came forward with this combined doctrine that is called the Ring of Fire and Unifying of Arenas. To make a long story short, The Ring of Fire actually refers to the military establishment that the Mullah regime and the proxies were building around Israel's neck for the last couple of decades by basically entrenching their power in arenas that are physically bordering Israel, namely Gaza Strip, in the shape of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, also to a certain extent in the West Bank, Lebanon, represented by the Lebanese Hezbollah, until the end of Assad regime in 2024. Also, Syria was part of this Ring of Fire, including not only Hezbollah's presence, but also Afghan and Iraqi and Pakistani Shiite militias. Yemen, a remote arena, yet part of this structure, where the Houthis in Yemen are playing also a significant role in this whole structure and building of this Ring of Fire. And the other component is the concept of the unifying of arenas. To make a long story short, the overall perspective or vision, if you wish, or blueprint was that once this Ring of Fire is created and settled on the ground in those arenas, both the ones that are physically bordering Israel as when the ones that are in a secondary circle like Iraq or Yemen, and we are talking about building a huge infrastructure of missiles, rockets, drones, dozens of thousands of militants. Once that Ring of Fire is ready on the ground and set to go, comes the time for the unifying of the arenas, meaning the time where all those arenas are coming together as one and in a comprehensive, orchestrated move are actually attacking Israel from all directions, and by that eliminating the state of Israel. That blueprint was basically underlying the whole process that led to Hamas' October 7 attack on Israel. Hamas is launching this attack under the assumption that the day of unifying of arena has come. Hamas' assumption was not totally baseless because he heard from his colleagues to the axis of resistance, particularly the most significant one, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and back then its leader Hassan Nasrallah, who told Hamas overtly, first it was covertly and then it was overtly, they said Hamas, إحنا جاهزون in Arabic, which means we are willing, ready, and able. And so Hamas is launching this attack, October 7 attack, under the assumption that the day of arenas, unifying of the arenas has come. However, things evolve differently following the October 7 attack. What happened following the October 7 attack in a retrospective process was the weakening of the axis of resistance and significantly compromising thus the Iranian regime expansion vision. A chain of events, a domino chain of events basically resulted this process. First, the war in Gaza following October 7, resulting in the significant defeat of Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip. The war expanded to the Lebanese arena when the Hezbollah joined the war, even though in a limited capacities. But before you know that, by the summer of 22, it became a full military collision between Israel and the Hezbollah, resulting in the famous beeper attacks, the elimination of all the senior leadership of the Hezbollah, both the military and the political one, including Hezbollah's Secretary General back then, Hassan Nasrallah, and his successor, Hashim Safi ad-Din. So by the end of 24, in November, there is a ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Hezbollah and Lebanon. And following that, within a couple of weeks, Assad regime is falling down. Assad regime that has been massively supported by Iran since the beginning of the war in Syria in 2011. One of its most significant supporters and spine was the Hezbollah, the Lebanese Hezbollah. The Lebanese Hezbollah was ordered by the Iranians to move to Syria already back in 2011 to fight to save Assad regime. But once the Hezbollah has been defeated and sustained a significant blow in 2024, it was unable to come to the aid of the Assad regime. The Syrian rebels, massively supported by Turkey and Qatar, took advantage of that And within a couple of weeks, Assad regime crumbles. Assad fled to Moscow, and by that, the Iranian regime lost its most significant cornerstone in a regional axis that the Iranian regime has been building for the last decades, pouring billions and billions and billions of dollars to build that structure. So that was the process basically leading a couple of months later to the first Iran war, sort of speaking, June 2025, or the 12 days war between Israel and Iran. That was actually the first time the Mullah regime, since the war with Iraq in the 1980s, that was the first time that the Mullah regime sustained a significant military damage following a direct contradiction or a collision with a military force, this time Israel, and that has been some significant development, further eroding the whole deterrence triangle that the Mullah regime was building. It's important to emphasize that at that point, though the axis of resistance was not evaporating and it was not totally disintegrating, it has been significantly weakened, and with that, the whole deterrence triangle that the Mullah regime has been building and implementing so effectively for the last couple of decades, all this triangle basically faced for the first time a very, very serious challenge. You could see the cartoon right in front of you by one of the Arab cartoonists, Yasser Ahmad, basically back then quite accurately describing the situation of the regime as it was trying to reassemble its damaged proxies. And so that leads us to 26, and the war in 26, the Second Iran War, or as it's called, Fury, Epic Fury in the US terminology, basically resulted in another interesting, I would say, twist point. When you look at the war, all in all, you look at some sort of like what I called from the beginning a poker game, and one could identify a very significant, powerful cards that the Iranian regime has been quite effectively using. First, it has a very clear strategic objective, simply to remain standing on its feet as the war is over. And that sense was already right there, embedded within the Iranian regime marketing policy since day one of the war. Since day one of the war, actually, following the first blast, the first shock that the Iranian regime sustained following the elimination of its supreme leader and all of its military and top leaders, the Iranian regime remained standing on its feet. And as far as the regime was concerned, it for itself was already a victory. The Iranian regime identified significant pressure cards. First, the global economy, by blocking the Hormuz trade, basically putting an enormous pressure on the global economy, particularly in the context of energy consumption, obviously the flow of oil. It also identified the growing discontent within Western public opinion vis-a-vis this war, the growing criticism in the United States vis-a-vis the necessity of this war, the legitimacy of this war. It also identified the upcoming moment of the World Cup. All those things were basically very effectively used by the regime as a mechanism to put pressure on the United States as the war has been going on. In addition, it identified an inner Arab frictions, competing goals and interests, particularly when you look closely at the Arab Gulf states, United Arab Emirates, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, though all of the Arab Gulf monarchies were attacked by the Iranians. And by the way, the UAE was the one sustained most of the attacks, even more than Israel. That was part of the Iranian very calculated policy to put pressure on the global economy by targeting its Arab Gulf neighbors and major suppliers and providers of oil and gas to the world. And finally, the Mullah regime identified that there is a different priorities in context of the two major partners fighting against the regime, namely Israel and the United States. And though there has been a very effective, successful militarily, intelligence, technologically cooperation between the two states, namely Israel and the United States, the Mullah regime very accurately identified that there are nuanced and differences in the priorities and objectives of the states, and those priorities, the gap has been expanding the war has been going on. So that leads us to the point of the signing of the MOU. And now there is a big question across the region following that MOU, and that is it going to basically re-energize the Iranian regime hegemonic aspiration? When we look from different perspectives, you could see very clearly why this question is very valid. First, going back to the triangle of deterrence that I mentioned before, it exists. The missile program, the drone program, the nuclear, and the proxies, they are all there. They have not vanished. Yes, they are significantly weakened across the board, in some aspect very severely beaten, particularly when we are talking about strategic infrastructure of the Iranian regime that are essential for its war machine industry that have been significantly damaged during the wars, particularly the recent one, but they are still standing on their feet. They are there. Not less significant is the fact that the way Iran views the situation, it is emboldened. It viewed itself as the one that is the victorious, not only because it survived that, but also because of the fact that it basically monetized a significant pressure card, at least at this point, and this is, of course, the Hormuz Strait. Some even calculate the possibility that as an outcome of that, the Iranian regime will resume its unifying of the arenas doctrine with all the ramifications that come along with it. And then there is another significant component we should be aware of, and this is the ideological. As far as the Mullah regime is concerned, this is an ideological triumph of the concept of the resistance that I've explained before, and it is validating, according to that outlook, the underlying claim that the West is weak and crumbles. I share with you one quote in that regard, this time by a Palestinian commentator who says, "The resilience of the resistance camp exceeds that of the West, allowing it to endure prolonged struggle and portray mere survival as a strategic achievement." So indeed, when you look at the ground, you can definitely see that Hezbollah is regrouping itself. It's clearly emboldened by the outcome of the war and the MOU. Houthis in Yemen, the same story. During the war, by the way, Houthis in Yemen, all along the war, almost to the last end, were basically on the sideline. The more the self-confidence of the Mullah regime was growing during the war, the more the self-confidence of the Houthis was increasing as well, basically manifested in the fact that towards the end of the war, they started here and there attacking Israel and threatening to once again block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Interesting enough, we'll talk about it maybe a little bit shortly after, Hamas and Islamic Jihad basically remain up until now on the sidelines. So this is the current situation, and what do we have to watch closely? Clearly, we have to watch closely, particularly the Lebanese arena. You could see in front of you these two Arab cartoons that to a large extent basically tells the story of Lebanon in that regard. On the right-hand side, you see the cartoon by a Palestinian cartoonist, Ala El-Latka, who basically says, as part of the MOU, Iran basically draws the lines of, or its red line, and you could see that its red line is Lebanon. In other words, Iran that built a remote control over Lebanon using the Hezbollah to that end, and by doing that, ensuring itself and direct access to the eastern basin of the Mediterranean, Iran has no intention to give up that remote control, and it has no intention to give up the role of the Hezbollah. That explains the fact that one of the things the Iranian regime insisted on the MOU was to basically impose a ceasefire situation in Lebanon. At the same time, we are looking at a reality where Lebanon is a stage of actually an ongoing war between Iran and Israel. This time it's not direct because it's between Israel and the Hezbollah. The Iranians, as you probably know, threatened that if Israel will continue its military operations in Gaza, in Lebanon, Iran will attack Israel and even will close again the Hormuz Strait. None of the things happened so far, but we are definitely looking at a situation where the Lebanon is a key arena to evaluate the continuation and trajectory down the path. Just the same, one way or another, Lebanese commentator, as you could see the quote in front of you, Ali Amin, basically said quite accurately, it says, Lebanon is the biggest loser of the US-Iran MOU. And by the way, this very day, as talks began in Switzerland between the United States and Iran, President Trump once again sent a threat to the Iranian regime, demanding them to restrain their proxies in Lebanon, the Hezbollah, but at the same time also basically it's very clear that the US administration at this point is also putting pressure on Israel to restrain its military activities in Lebanon. Right now you see in front of you the map that represents the Israeli military presence in the south part of Lebanon, all this orange line that you see that is confined with this yellow line. This is the security zone defined by Israel as of now, where Israel basically has been putting pressure on the whole infrastructure of Hezbollah along this zone. The most hardest name as of today is, of course, a ridge called Ali Taher Ridge. You could see it circled with this red circle. This is a ridge that is basically located some 8 miles north of Israel. This is a ridge that is considered to be one of the most strategic infrastructure of the Hezbollah in Lebanon, rather known as also Imad 5. This is a ridge where reportedly there are huge tunnels, massive tunnels, the Hezbollah built all those years, massively funded by the Iranians with the North Korean knowledge and participation. Those are actually underground cities of missiles that were built according to the same method of the underground cities of missiles in Iran and in North Korea. The most recent developments in that context are talking about Israeli presence on that ridge. I cannot say that we are looking at a full occupation of that ridge. There are contradicting reports. Israel took over a major town called Tibnit next to that ridge. And basically, as reportedly, there are right now dozens, maybe more, of Hezbollah's militants that are trapped in this huge complex and they are sieged by Israel. But these are reports that we should have to look at very carefully. One way or another, we are looking at a very complex reality right now in Lebanon. As it's very clear that Lebanon becomes the test case in many ways for the trajectory of this MOU down the road. I would add something interesting in that regard. In the last couple of days, President Trump, more than once, including today, basically said that he is thinking about handling the issue of the Hezbollah to the Syrian regime. In other words, that Syria will handle the issue of the Hezbollah. The most recent report that was published in Fox News basically argued that President Trump allegedly said that the Syrian regime should fight the Hezbollah in the south part of Lebanon. To make a long story short, I don't think that this is a realistic scenario for different reasons. One of the most significant, maybe the most significant one, is that Syria has no interest in the end of the day to be engaged in such a war, given to the need to restore itself, to rehabilitate after 14 and 15 years of violence and war in Syria. There are other reasons for that. Maybe this is some sort of like Trump's way to try to put additional pressure on the Iranians, basically saying that they may find their most significant proxy, the Hezbollah, facing a double front, meaning Israel on the one hand and Syrians on the other hand. We should remember that the Syrians suffered a lot from this Hezbollah's intervention in the war in Syria. There is a lot of hatred and animosity of the Syrians towards the Hezbollah for what it has done to the Syrian people during the war. However, I don't think that this is currently something that is realistically feasible. And that calls us to turn our look to another arena. This is Gaza Strip. As I mentioned before, as of now, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are still on the sideline. One should notice that through all this war and the MOU, the Iranian regime that has been constantly playing the card of defending the Palestinians and liberating Palestine and standing with the Gaza people and supporting Gaza, did nothing about that. It's not mentioned in the MOU. It was never discussed. There are different reasons for that. One reason is that for the Iranian regime, in the end of the day, the issue of the Palestinians and Gaza is, of course, a pawn. And at this point, it's not so significant for the Iranians to secure their position on that arena. But according to the outcome of the situation in Lebanon, one should not be surprised that if the Iranian regime will be also successfully in dictating its agenda in Lebanon, it should not take long before it will turn also its focus to Gaza Strip, and accordingly, we could witness more and more resurrection, sort of speaking, of Hamas and Islamic Jihad activities and momentum. So at this point, Gaza Strip currently is yet not included with the evolving situation, but definitely could be impacted. And one thing that we should remember in the context of Gaza Strip, there is a United Nations Resolution Council 2803 that basically ordered the disarmament of the Hamas in Gaza Strip. Israel constantly says, well, if the world is not going to do that, Israel will do that, with all the ramifications that come along with it. In other words, we are looking at two arenas, Lebanon and Gaza, that prior to October 7 has been very integrated, obviously following October 7. And then there was a process with the weakening of the axis of resistance that these arenas has been separated. But now, again, there is a potential scenario that those arenas will reemerge again. The meaning of that, the bottom line, is, as you could understand, quite negative. So that leads us to the final part of the briefing today, and this is, of course, the issue of the regional perspectives. When you screen, as I do, day in and day out, the regional perspectives and commentators across the region, I think that it's quite clear that you could notice very easily a deep sense of skepticism. You see right in front of you two cartoons that are basically representing that. On the top, you see a cartoon by an Egyptian cartoonist that described this Iranian-US truce as a balloon that is kind of like flying within these thorns. Each and every one of those thorns could easily puncture that balloon, and that will be the end of that. Beneath, you see another cartoon that represents the skepticism. This time it's by Amjad al-Rasmi, and you could see there are two walls. The MOU is kind of like jumping over the first wall, meaning the signing, but then it is facing a second wall, which is much higher, much taller. This is the wall of the execution or the implementation. It's very clear that there is a lot of skepticism in the region. You see in front of you the quotes. For example, major senior Saudi media person, Zaid Ben Kami, says, has the Iranian threat been eliminated? The answer is far from yes. Nadim Kutayish, a Lebanese Shiite journalist, basically says the ceasefire is a prelude for the next round and it will be more severe. An interesting observation, an accurate one, by Egyptian commentator Sameh Rashid, who says the success of the MOU is highly questionable, given that it addresses only half of the issues at stake. Each side presents only part of the truth, and each side interprets the agreement through its own lenses. These are all, to the best of my judgment, very accurate and valid observations. All in all, when you look at the picture, I would say that this cartoon reflects accurately the situation. We are looking at a mutual chokehold. This cartoon by Imad Hajjaj, a very well-known cartoonist in the Arab world, basically tells the story how each and every one of the players is holding and suffocating the other in a kind of like tangled, sort of speaking, hold, which of course make the whole scenery very, very complicated. All sides are exerting pressure on one another, but Iran appears to be the party in control, as according to that cartoon. Like, for example, if you look at the Lebanese arena at the same time is a pressure tool that the Iranians use, but at the same time it's also a pressure tool that Trump can use against the Iranians. So this is a great example of this mutual chokehold that we are looking at. Only today, President Trump, yet again, threatened the Iranians that if they will close the Hormuz Strait, that will result in a severe military attack on Iran. Once again, we are going back to this mutual choke and mutual threat scenario that we are experiencing right now in front of us. So, trying to conclude the regional perspective, I would say that we are definitely looking at a combination of frustration and concern. When we talk about Israel, the frustration, the disappointment, the concern are very overt from all different perspectives. One has to remember that in the end of the day, from a military and an intelligence perspective, Israel marked an enormously outstanding achievements, including, of course, the very tight operational, militarily, and intelligence with the United States of America. And that is basically a sharp contrast to the very disappointing, hurting, concerning outcome of the MOU, as it's being reflected on the MOU. Those feelings are also, I would say, existing, of course, in the Arab world, particularly when you talk about the Arab Gulf monarchies, but they are much more covert and not overt for different reasons. In the end of the day, they have to live next to this Iranian regime, and they sustained a significant attacks, as I mentioned before, by the Iranian regime. So all in all, when I try to sum up the regional perspectives, I would say the following observations. The war could and should have been the final nail in the coffin of Iran's hegemonic project, following the domino effect of October 7, as I mentioned before. The outcome of the war, as of now, might re-energize Iran's aspiration. It might, it's not necessarily to say it will, but it's definitely something that we cannot ignore today. Both Israel and Arab countries are concerned with the possibility of a backwind for Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Palestine, Iraqi Shiite militias, and the emboldening of the Houthis' aggression. The quote you see in front of you basically illustrated the significant threat as far as the Arab world, let alone Israel, are considering when they look at the Iranian regime. This is a quote by a senior Saudi journalist, chair of Al-Arabiya's editorial board, a very, very major Saudi media outlet. And he says, very accurately, he says, no state succeeded in establishing a broad sphere of influence across the Arab world through both hard and soft power, as Iran did over the course of 3 decades, until the events of October 7, 2023. The subtext here is much more rough. Basically, Iran inflicted an enormous death and destruction across the Arab world. And you could see here some very indirect Saudi criticism, to put it this way, regarding the outcome of the situation. In other words, basically, the process of the domino effect that weakened the Iranian regime and its proxies, that basically led to a final end of sealing and ending the Iranian hegemonic vision, that process took a shift of 180 degrees, and with all the ramifications that comes along with it. And one last thing that also has to be mentioned in the context of the regional perspectives, the MOU further emphasizes a regional narrative that particularly is in the discourse of the Arab world, and it's not a new one. It's one that has been for a long time there, and it refers to all American administrations, both Democrats as well as Republicans. And this is a narrative that basically argue that the United States is not a reliable ally. This is something that also one can detect today in the Arab public realm and discussion. As we always say in our institute inside the Middle East, ITME, in the end of the day, if we want to understand Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we must understand the Middle East, and definitely this is one of yet many pivotal moment and turning point in the story of the region. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I am concluding my presentation and I'm opening this session to your questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Avi. So if you have questions, you can keep using the Q&A sections to give it to us. We have 20 minutes before the end of the session. And if we don't have time to address all of your questions, Avi is going to provide answers through our social network accounts, so stay tuned. Avi, first question. What do you think Israel should and will do in Lebanon?
The most significant thing that Israel has to do in the context of Lebanon, in my opinion, is to reconstruct a positive, constructive dialogue with the Trump administration. There has been, as you probably know, a lot of tensions in the last couple of days. There is a lot of space in the end of the day for cooperation between the sides. Remember that in the end of the day, Trump administration is also interested in ending Hezbollah's and Iran control over Lebanon, and the Trump administration has been proactively moving towards restoring the Lebanese sovereignty. The most significant thing in that regard is, of course, the initiating of a direct Israeli-Lebanese discussion and negotiations, which is a very significant and positive process. So in that regard, I would say this is the most significant thing that Israel has to do in the context of Lebanon, re-establish the understanding with Trump administration around the understanding and the mutual consensus that it is all sides' interest to end the Hezbollah's ability to continue and to dictate its radical agenda, to move forward in the discussions and the negotiation with the Lebanese government, to further strengthen the process that is already undertaking in Lebanon, where across the board, Lebanese and the Lebanese political system is basically looking to end the occupation of Lebanon by Iran and by the Hezbollah, moving toward that direction and marking some achievements will enable Israel gradually to pull out from Lebanon, of course, encompassed with all kind of an arrangement that has to be guaranteed by the United States and big regional factors like the Saudis, like the Egyptians, that have an interest in basically also reducing and restricting, in the end of the day, Hezbollah's ability to continue and to dictate its radical agenda as it was able to do, unfortunately, for the last couple of decades. So I would say that in the context of Lebanon, that is the most significant thing that Israel should do. Reminding you again that from a military perspective, the same time that the Trump administration is limiting or putting pressure on Israel in context of its military presence in Lebanon, at the same time, this is a very significant pressure card in the hands of Trump in the context of the negotiations with the Iranians. So we are looking at a very convoluted situation, but the most significant thing in my view is to move forward towards renewing understanding with the Trump administration and the diplomatic channel.
Okay, next question. Is there any possibility that the US-Iran MOU is not as bad as it looks on every level, but somehow it is the master deal maker playing 3D chess in order to get through the US midterm elections?
This is an outlook that is out there. Honestly, I mean, when we try to look at the MOU as of now, and that was I was trying to do, the way it's being perceived and viewed by the Iranians, by the regional players, I think it's quite clear that across the board, it's very difficult to find someone across the board who will say that this MOU is an ultimate Iranian defeat. Let's put it very mildly. In fact, everyone across the board says this is a strategic achievement of the Iranian regime. And to a large extent it is, at least at this point in the way it's being viewed and in the current configuration. And I emphasize the current configuration because in the end of the day, we need to remember a couple of significant things. The Mullah regime has been significantly beaten. In many ways, its assets, particularly in the context of its nuclear program, its missiles, its heavy industry, though not eliminated, have been significantly crippled. There is a significant setback in that regard. Not less significant, we should remind ourselves that in the end of the day, Iran is a crumbling state. The Iranian regime, putting aside all other things, knows and realizes that it has to deal in the end of the day with the inner huge challenges of the Iranian people, and the tasks, at least in the eyes of some people, is almost undoable. Also, we have to remember that the United States, in the end of the day, still possess some very, very, very strong pressure card on the Iranian regime. We are talking about the sanctions. We are talking about freezing assets. We are talking about, if needed, a military siege on the Iranian ports, as it happened during the war. So in the end of the day, we have to look at things in a much more broader way. We have to try and to estimate in the end of the day what are the weak points and the trajectory ahead based upon those calculations. So I would say that in the end of the day, as of now, in the current configuration, the Iranian regime definitely can mark significant achievements. The region is looking at that way, but at the same time, we should remind ourselves that in the end of the day, assuming that President Trump is insisting to at least fulfill some of its objectives in this war, and given the fact that it has significant pressure card, that may result in a couple of months from now, a totally new reality as well. So it's a very fluid situation, and I think that we should all look at it at this point that way.
Next question. What do the various Middle Eastern countries want to happen at this point? Where do they stand? You've discussed that they criticize the MOU, but not what they support or want to see happen. Please offer your unique perspective on the Arab world.
Well, as I said before, and I was quoting Abdurrahman al-Rashid, the Arab world, the Arab states suffered significantly from the Iranian regime. I talked about the disaster that this regime inflicted upon the Arab world, obviously also upon Israel as well. Now, you could understand that the Arab world, in the back rooms, they were wishing to see this regime falling down. It did not happen. They have to basically find a way to continue and co-live or coexist with that regime. Now, on the diplomatic level and the formal level, the message coming from the Arab world to the Iranian regime all those years, and particularly, of course, now, is the same message. They're saying to the regime, look, we are neighbors. We want to have a good relationship. We just want you to stay out of our business. The challenge is that the Iranian regime has a different perspective on that, and that results in all those frictions. Now, in the Arab world today, there is, of course, understanding or assumption that the Iranian regime may come out strengthened following this whole episode, and therefore the challenge not only is diminishing, but it's maybe increasing, and there is a need to restructure in a way that will be also kind of like create an axis that will counter this possible resuming of the Iranian regime hegemonic aspiration. In that regard, we are looking today, for example, at an interesting axis of major regional players, Sunni states, Saudi Arabia, Sunni Arab, Pakistan, Sunni but not Arabs, and Turkey, Sunnis as well but not Arabs. And in addition to that, we may see a growing involvement of Egypt in a secondary role, let's put it this way, particularly in the context of the Red Sea and the Gaza Strip. And one of the major objectives of such an axis, assuming it's going to evolve and assuming it's going to become solid, which is also questionable, given to the complex nature of relationship, particularly between the Saudis and the Turks, could basically act as a counter-significant axis to the Iranian hegemonic vision. So this is one aspect in the context of the Arab world. We may see that under this umbrella of such an axis, again, assuming it is going to evolve, we'll see other Arab states like Jordan, like Lebanon, like Syria that are basically becoming part of this axis, which is very likely to happen. In that regard, I will mention that recently Saudi Arabia and Turkey announced that they are going to launch a huge project connecting the two states through a railway that will basically cross through Jordan and Syria. It is a megalomanic project, so to speaking, that is basically supposed to take years to conduct. One could seriously doubt whether it's going to take place, but nevertheless, it is some sort of manifesto or a statement that is not less also aimed at the Iranian regime. Other significant issue is, of course, the oil chain of supply, the vulnerability of the chain of supply. Obviously, one of the things that is likely to expect is that the Arab Gulf monarchies will look for ways to minimize as much as possible their vulnerability following the Iranian attacks on their oil refineries and infrastructure. Right now, we are looking at the Saudi east to west pipeline that crosses Saudi Arabia, that is today has a capacity of some 5 million barrels a day, expected to increase. We look at the United Arab Emirates that basically is now looking to use the Fujairah port, which is located outside of the area of the Hormuz Strait, as a major launching point for oil. We look at Kuwait and Iraq that are looking to establish an independent establishment of oil chain of delivery and so on. These are all things that are happening, but yet we are looking at some giant projects, partially maybe could be fulfilled in the next couple of years, partially are basically beyond the horizon line. But again, this is part of this attempt of reconfiguration in a potential scenario, again, potential scenario, possible scenario, that the Iranian regime will re-energize its aggression across the region the way it did before October 7, which is a scenario. It should be taken seriously, but at the same time, we also should remember that there are some significant obstacles on the path of that scenario. As I mentioned before, the major blow that the Iranian regime sustained, the situation inside Iran, the changes that happen in arenas like Gaza Strip and Lebanon, particularly what happened, of course, in Syria as well. All those things together are basically kind of like creates a buffer, a balance to the attempt of the Iranian regime to resume its hegemonic expansion and to duplicate it is the same volume it used to be before October 7.
Next question. We are almost 3 years into the war, and if the US backs away from supplying defense equipment to Israel, can Israel support itself? Will Bibi survive this round of voting?
Well, I'm aware of those voices. I don't think that we are there. I think obviously there are lots of currently disagreement and differences of perspectives between Israel and the current administration. And there are some substantial differences that will continue on and maybe even deepen. We are looking at some political processes that are taking place both in Israel as well as in the United States. The picture at this point, on the one hand, is of course a source of deep thinking about the trajectory ahead and the nature of the relationship. I think that at this point, we are still, of course, looking at a strong alliance. We need to remember that in the end of the day, there are many aspects of relationship between Israel and the United States that clearly were manifested in the war of a strong cooperation and alliance that is based upon mutual benefit. Alongside that, we have the tensions between the two, the government in Israel and the Trump administration. I think that we have to add to that the fact that Israel is heading an elections within a couple of months. It is estimated that there will be a transformation of power in Israel. And it seems like when you look at the potential assembling of the upcoming new government, according to the analysis and predictions across the board, it will be government that will be quite different from the current government. It will be government that apparently will be more open to diplomatic initiatives, and that will likely to ease, sort of speaking, frictions within the current administration and future administrations in the United States. But these are part of the factors of this whole equation. Obviously, we are looking at this point at some, I would say, challenging point in the context of the relation between the two states. It's not something that actually we never experienced in the past. There has been quite a lot of episodes of frictions and disagreements between the Israeli government and American administrations, both Democrats and Republicans. This is yet another one. The configuration is, I would say, more complex and challenging for many reasons. But I would say that all in all, we should basically look at it under the basic assumption that still there is a solid common ground between the two states. There is a strong cooperation in many levels. And there is a strong understanding of sharing values and sharing capacities that are mutually benefit to the sides. And I think that with the change of political atmosphere, it as expected, by analysts in Israel following the government, following the next elections, it's likely to expect that there will be an ease of the frictions that we see today.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the $300 billion to Iran as part of the current deal?
Well, that's part of the things that basically fuels the concern that I was talking about. People are saying, look, in the region, if you stream hundreds of billions of dollars to that regime that is on the brink of totally collapse, you are basically revitalizing the regime and you basically reviving its aggression. Because it's obvious that some of this money will be allocated to continue and further reboost its proxies on the ground. It will be allocated to restructure and rebuild its significantly damaged capacities, the missiles and the infrastructure and the heavy industry that was significantly damaged in the war and so on. So obviously, from that perspective, you can understand that as part of the major concern and I would say frustration, and not to say deep concern of the region, as I was portraying before. Obviously, the issue of the $300 billion that are allegedly supposed to stream to the Iranian treasury are fueling that. I would reserve that, however, by saying that, to the best of my understanding, it's a money or funds that are basically dependent or conditioned with Iranian regime compliance and playing a ball with the region. I don't know what's the definitions exactly, and I don't know what it's going to be looked like and who is going to implement it. At this point, it seems like something that is more on a paper and much less in a concrete perspectives. Like, for example, it wasn't clear who is going to pay those $300 billion. Clearly not the American taxpayers. There were rumors that Qatar is paying that, but the Qataris basically denied it. So At this point, I would say that it's more on the level of these question marks that are centers around this whole MOU and basically part of this deep skepticism across the region regarding the success odds of negotiations and the implementation of full negotiation, a full agreement, should such an agreement will be achieved between the United States and Iran.
Thank you so much. Last question for today. What is the Lebanese government doing during the fighting? Are they assisting Israel to remove Hezbollah? Or are they trying to prevent Israel from attacking in their territory? Where do the Lebanese people stand regarding the MOU?
The Lebanese people across the board, basically for a long period of time, way before October 7, definitely before the MOU, basically the Lebanese people know that they have been occupied by Hezbollah and the Iranians. And there has been across the board a cry out of the Lebanese that they want to get free of the suffocating Lebanese Hezbollah's grip and the Iranian grip. Following October 7 and the domino effect, for the first time ever since the Hezbollah emerged in the early 80s, for the first time ever, there has been a window, or maybe still a window of opportunity to basically end Hezbollah's suffocating grip on Lebanon. We have to be very clear about it. Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese system. It's part of the political system. It's part of the government. The Hezbollah is not going to disappear. The end game is to restrict the Hezbollah's ability to continue and to be the one who decides whether Lebanon is at war or whether Lebanon is not at war. And following October 7 domino effect, one of the most significant things was that this sentiment of the Lebanese people was now expressed in the political system, where for the first time, the Lebanese government openly, officially demanded the Hezbollah to disarm itself and ordered the Lebanese army to make a plan to disarm the Hezbollah. Now, the catch is that, of course, they can't do that because the Hezbollah is much more powerful. Here comes the point of the international factors, the regional factors, the pressure, and so on and so on. Hence, going back to the statement by Ali Al-Amin, the Lebanese commentator that I mentioned before, who said, Lebanon is the biggest loser. Basically what he's saying is like, until that situation of the war and the MOU, Lebanon was now on a trajectory that for the first time ever, there was a real chance that Lebanon finally could get free of the suffocating grip of Lebanon, of Hezbollah in Iran. As a fact, the Lebanese government is now engaged in a direct negotiations with Israel, which is of course a very good thing, because the Hezbollah vetoed all those years such a thing. Hezbollah basically took himself the decision when there is a war and when there is a not war, regardless of what the Lebanese people want. Now, the concern is that one of the negative ramifications of the MOU is that the United States basically will recognize the custodian of Iran on Lebanon with all the ramifications that comes along with it. The meaning of that is that in such situation, there is no chance that Lebanon will get free of the suffocating Iranian and the Hezbollah pressure. So at that point, again, that's the reason I emphasize so much the Lebanese arena. We'll have to watch closely because the arena is going to attract all this regional power struggle. Obviously, there is going to be demand also by Arab major players from Trump administration not to allow the Iranian and the Hezbollah to recover or to reestablish their hold on Lebanon. And so that's the reason why the Lebanese arena is so significant, let alone, of course, Israel. And Israel, basically, we should remind ourselves, following October 7, any Israeli government will not tolerate a situation of existence of a military threat in the shape of the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad in Gaza, let alone the shape of Hezbollah in Lebanon, as it was before October 7. And so Israel will convey a very strong message, and it will have to stick to that, that it will have to act in any way to remove that, unless, as of course we all hope that will be the case, unless there will be an arrangement in Lebanon, that the bottom line will be that the Hezbollah is not any longer the one dictating the agenda. The Hezbollah will continue to be part of Lebanon, but the objective should be, like the story of the Hamas in Gaza Strip, the objective should be, in the end of the day, to create the mechanisms and the conditions that will not allow neither Hezbollah in Lebanon nor Hamas in Gaza Strip to continue and to dictate the radical agenda, or in other words, not to allow Iran any longer to continue and to dictate its agenda using its proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon or Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip.
Thank you so much, Avi. In the light of this answer, actually, it echoed the very first question we got in the Q&A. Is like, if Iran seemingly abandoned Hamas, why make them continue to support Hezbollah?
Well, Iran did not abandon Hamas. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are currently sitting on the sideline. They are observing to see how things are going to evolve. Obviously, in the back room, they will be very happy if the final outcome will be clearly the rebuilding of Iran as a regional power and the re-strengthening of Iran expansion policy. At this point, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are still observing. There is one significant thing that I mentioned before we should remember. The Iranians constantly have been playing the card of the Palestinians all those years in the name of liberating Palestine and supporting Gaza, which is of course a pawn. The Iranians couldn't care less, neither about the Palestinians nor about Gaza. The Palestinians know that. The Arab world knows that. Now there is a situation where it's a little bit unclear. And as a fact, the Iranian, as I said before, did not mention even once, neither Gaza nor the Palestinian case, no nothing, not in the MOU, not in the discussions, not in the rhetoric. The way we see that, I would say that the Iranians are basically looking to see what will be the outcome in the context of Lebanon and the region. If they will be able to succeed in the context of Lebanon and the region, you could expect that it wouldn't take long before they will focus also in Gaza, and it wouldn't take long before you'll see Hamas and Islamic Jihad running back to the arms of the Iranians. Currently, they are on the observation point, so sort of speaking, to look and see how things will evolve.
Thank you so much. We have to conclude for today. If we couldn't address yet your questions, follow us on socials and we will do our best to provide the answers over there. Thank you, Avi.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Goodbye.